So I finally got our ultimate Viessa build up and running for us. This build is fantastic at locking down spawn points and instantly clearing huge groups of enemies over a long duration in a really good sized area. There's a lot you can do with this. There's a really good void shard farm that you can do on the fortress, and it's just overall super quick at clearing as well, like the swamp abandoned refinery. That one you can run through pretty quickly in like 45 seconds with this setup, even a little bit less if you get used to it. So there's a lot of really cool things you can do with it. It's really good for anything that you just need to lock down. And the best part is we also have a secondary setup that I'll be showing in this video to show how you can actually boss with this setup. If you want to use the AoE setup for bossing, you can. You can kill Pyro in like probably under 2 minutes with it. But if you do swap over to the bossing setup, you can kill him in like a minute or less. Unfortunately, I can't fully optimize the bossing setup at the same time as fully optimizing the AoE setup, just because every single slot has to be catalyzed. And then so I'm missing like 2 mods that I'd really want to put on for the bossing setup. I will mention those too, so if you want to spec this fully for the bossing setup, you can, but personally there are better bossers out there even for Pyro, so I'm going to be specing her into her strengths, and that's the AoE lockdowns. So that's what we're going to be focusing on here in this video. We're going to go over every single thing that you need to know about this character. We're going to go through all of her abilities, the weapons that I recommend that you guys run with this setup, and all of her reactors that you can run, the external components, the sets, all of that good stuff, and obviously all of her mods and the ways I think it builds her best. I've been hard at work at this build and a few others, not to mention we're going to have Ultimate Valby this week as well. So we're going to have a bunch of builds coming here on the channel, so make sure you guys are subscribed for those. But with all that good stuff out of the way, let's jump right into this build. So how does Viessa actually work with this build? Let's go over her skills first with the main setup, the main AoE setup. So first off, her Frost Shard skill, her number 1, is going to be really good as quick supplemental damage. It's going to be in a pretty big radius at 6.7 meters with the current mods that I have set up, and it does quite a bit of damage, especially when it crits. I use this all the time for just clearing small hordes of enemies. I just press this once, the animation's really quick, and it flies a decent ways away and will instantly explode upon hitting them and pretty much instantly take them out. It's great. Frost Road, this is really good for moving around quickly. Not to mention you're going to be leaving the Frost Trail behind you, inflicting Ice Shackle, which is then going to trigger your passive skill. So these are the ice spheres. As you inflict Ice Shackle, you're going to be creating these ice spheres. They're going to fly out towards nearby enemies. So it's a great way of passively taking out enemies. These also do really good damage, especially when they crit. And the Frost Roads is a great way of just passively doing that without spending any other skill. They're going to be walking over these ice roads, and you're instantly going to be throwing out all of these ice spheres, which is really nice. Now, the main skill within the AoE setup is going to be the Cold Snap Watch. So this is the augment, the Transcendent mod for the 3rd ability. Instead of just a wave that you send out, now we're going to be sending out a wave that leaves down an AoE field for quite a bit of duration. Right now, I have the cooldown down to 3.7 seconds, and I have the duration up to 14.1. Now, if I do get a better set piece, that duration is going to go up a little bit more, which is really nice. And the range on it is great as well. It's going almost 20 meters at 19.2, and then it's 5.8 meters wide. Now, with a better reactor, which unfortunately I have not been able to farm this week because there has not been a good one, but during this week, coming up on the 29th and 30th here, basically this week, this is going to be a great reactor that you should be able to go farm. I think it's back in the rotation, but if we get our good roll on that of like crit chance and range, this range is going to be significantly higher, and you're going to be able to lock down a much bigger area. But this thing you're always going to be spamming if you know an enemy is spawning or coming from a certain area. You can throw this down and just instantly lock it down, and then that's where you supplement with your Frost Shards or anything like that. Now, Blizzard is a big damage skill. Also, it's on a 11.2 second cooldown currently with this setup, which is really nice, and it's going to last 10 seconds. So you can almost always have one of these things out, which is so strong. When you crit with this thing, it's going to hit for like 1,000,000 plus easy. And if the higher you get their crit chance, the more and more it's going to tick for, and it's just so good. This is our main way of dealing with any sort of like boss enemy that you're going to encounter. Also, it works really well for just locking down additional area next to your cold snap, so you can use this pretty freely. It doesn't cost all that much mana at 38, and you're going to be getting mana back quite a bit with the setup with just how many enemies you're killing. So feel free to spam this along with your cold snap, but I would just kind of save it for any sort of really big group that you know is going to be spawning, or a pretty beefy single target. So now that we know about this build and its skills, let's talk about the reactors that you're wanting to be looking for with the setup. So for the actual reactor itself, you're looking for chill and fusion as your skill power boost. Now, in terms of the actual passives on here, skill cooldown is really good. That's how you can have basically constant uptime, but some other really good options that I'm going to be looking for myself once I can farm a better one is going to be crit chance. That's probably my top pick, just because the more you crit with this build, and Viessa has really good base crit stats, the more you crit with this build, the way more consistent and higher damage it's going to feel. So you can either do like crit chance cooldown, you can do crit chance and range if you want to lock down a slightly bigger area. Either of those are really good options, or if you want to just focus on just max damage hits, you can do crit chance and crit damage. Any of those combinations will serve you well. For the specific AoE setup, I do recommend the Thunder Cage with it as it's mounting, just because it's a really good AoE clearing weapon and it's going to synergize really well. But you can do any weapon you want. One weapon I've been kind of messing with is the Blue Beetle, because this weapon, as you rank it up, is going to give you more and more crit hit rate for your skills, which is really nice, and it's going to trigger 100% of the time and last 10 seconds. So anytime we use a fusion skill, which is our first 3 skills, we're going to get this buff, which is super strong, and it's going to help us deal a lot more consistent damage. But this thing is definitely not necessary. Most of the time, like I said, just because it is my mounting, I use the Thunder Cage, but it is just better for clearing a bit quicker. Then for the external components, there's one set that I really like to use, and that is the Battle Aesthetic set, specifically with the auxiliary power and the processor, just because they roll defense. The other ones, I believe, roll shield. Whatever combo it is ends up with a shield, but now with this setup, I can get 2 HPs and 2 defenses, which is our best bet. Now, the actual passives on here, max HP as a passive is a must, and then you're going to want the mana regen while not in combat here as the second one. That's going to help you sustain your mana much better, because we're not running MP collector with this build. You really do not need MP collector, but with that 2-piece set, you're going to get 18% skill critical hit rate, which is a nice little bump. And like I said, that critical hit rate just makes the build feel so much more consistent and feel like it does a lot more damage. Then the other set that we're going to run is the Annihilation set. This is going to give us a little bit more duration. I unfortunately do not have a sensor that with this roll, so with the sensor, you're really going to want max MP and MP recovery in combat. This is going to help your sustain as you are spamming skills so much. So really look for this. I would focus on just using a normal legendary sensor with that first before you focus on the set. But if you do have an Annihilation set to do that, I 100% recommend that just for that extra duration. And then on the Annihilation memories, you can look for defense, and there's also MP recovery modifier. That's specifically what I'm going to be looking for, but I also don't have the greatest version of that either for the Annihilation. So you can run any of those on that passive. And then on the processor, it doesn't matter a ton. The main one that I would look for would be the item acquisition distance right here, this passive. This is going to help it make it much more consistent to be picking up all of the MP drops that the enemies are doing. So the other passives with this processor are really not that good. I genuinely think the item acquisition distance might be your best bet overall, but then you can fit in like max shield or whatever the heck else you want in there. I would specifically just focus on the acquisition distance. Taking a look at our actual modules for our grapple, I like to run long distance. I think it's way better than midair, but if you like midair, definitely run it. I have this spot catalyzed for the extra points. You're going to have essentially every single slot in this build catalyzed. I even have the Transcendent mod catalyzed just so I can mess around a bit more with the bossing setup, like I was saying earlier. I can't fit everything that I want in the bossing setup, which we're going to get to here in a little bit. But this helped me with a little bit more freedom, but it's completely up to you. Unless you want to max out your cold snap, then you probably don't need to, but just keep that in mind if you run out of space with the bossing setup. For the actual mods though, we're going to be running HP amplification for the increased HP. We want as much as possible. You can run the blue HP mod, increased HP. It's really not that big of a difference. Whichever one you have maxed out, just go ahead and slap it there. From here, we're going to be focusing into our cooldowns. So we want MP conversion and nimble fingers. These two are going to give us a ton of cooldown. And that's also going to pair with our 2 damage mods. So Focus on Chill and Focus on Fusion are each going to be boosting up our main skills while also providing us with some extra cooldown. That's how we get to that 11.2 per seconds right there, along with our reactor. So it's really nice for getting those cooldowns down. And on our cold snap, that's down to 3.7 seconds. From here, we're going to be focusing on our duration. So skill extension and maximize duration. The skill power modifier is really not a huge deal, especially only at -20. It's really not going to make that much of a difference, especially for our ult, which is our like main damage dealer. Its modifier is insane at like 1400, so you're not going to notice any sort of damage difference where it matters, and that's going to give us a ton of duration. On our 3, that's up to 14 seconds. So think of how many of these you can have at once. If you put these in the same spot, they're going to tick individually. So you're going to be dealing a lot more single target damage if you overlap them, which is nice. And with our Blizzard, it's up to 10.6 seconds, which is a ton of extra damage intervals. And it's almost constant uptime here at 11.2 versus 10.6. Like half a second between casting these, which is unreal. To close it out, we're going to be focusing on our crit. Like I said, Viessa has really good crit rates for her skills, so I just run a maxed out skill insight and concentration for the crit chance and the crit damage. You can do any combination though of like the purple ones, so front lines and emergency measures. So if you just want to max out and get like really big numbers, you can do concentration and front lines, or if you just want more consistent crits, you can do emergency measures and insight as your 2. Play around with those, whatever combination you like, you can run, but I personally just run the 2 blues and get the best of both worlds. Quickly looking at our actual skill stats before I show you a little bit of gameplay and how I actually use this build. Our skill critical hit rate is at 35%. If you guys were using the blue beetle as your main weapon, this would be a little bit higher all the time, which is really nice. And then our multiplier is about 2.6, which is pretty decent, especially for just like trash ad clearing. We don't need it to be super crazy high, but for actually playing this build, the main thing I try to do is keep my frost roads active, because if you're running around the enemies, they're going to inflict ice shackle. This is where you get your ice spheres. You can see them appearing around my head, and they're just automatically going to fly out enemies that I'm looking at, and it crits pretty decent, like 100k or so, a little bit more on these level 100 enemies, by the way, and they all are like not really the trash ads, so you're gonna be hitting a lot harder in your actual game most of the time. And then our bread and butter skill, our 3, our cold snap, is just gonna leave a AoE field on the ground, and it's gonna tick constantly in there. It's a pretty decent range, and you can overlap these. If I put 2 of them, they're gonna be ticking at the same time there. You can see a couple 187Ks going. So it's really nice for just really good passive damage and locking down some spawn zones. Your 1 ability is really good for just like quickly clearing a group of enemies. So if there's like a small group of trash ads, you can just press your 1 and you're gonna send it out immediately. It's a really quick animation. It travels pretty quick and it deals really good damage. As you can see, it's like 470k on these guys, and it deals a lot of damage with low MP and low cooldowns. You can see how fast I can spam that right there, and how much my MP bar is barely going down. Now, if you do encounter any sort of bosses or need to lock down an extra area with some AoE, is where you're going to be using your Blizzard. This is what's going to be ticking for quite a bit of damage at like 600 and something K on these level 100s. And then when you get to the initial place down, and at the very end is going to do a burst damage, which is quite a bit more, up to like 836k on that burst. So helps you deal a lot of damage and just lock down extra area. And once again, look how little my MP bar goes down by spamming that. So don't be afraid to be using your skills when you're killing actual enemies. They're going to be dropping MP orbs. You can go pick those up very easily. And if you have all of the correct passives on your external components, you're going to be able to keep up your mana very easily. Now, quickly going over the bossing setup, we're going to be using Hypothermia now as our Transcendent mod. This is also a C icon, so it does match up with our Cold Snap, so it's very easy to swap between the two. The only issue is these other slots, because we unfortunately in this state of the game cannot change them, and we need to catalyze every single slot. Easily my least favorite part of the game at the moment. I really wish you could have individual setups. I don't really understand the purpose of presets if it's all just going to be the same, optimized for just one setup. But we are able to make this work pretty well right now. Once again, I can kill Pyro in like a minute or less. Essentially, I just have to wait for the grappling hook cooldown, when you can actually grapple his weak points, and knock him down, because when you are using this setup on Pyro, doing any sort of skill damage is going to be doing a ton to him, and it's going to fill up his little enrage meter incredibly quickly. So normally what I try to do is just focus on damaging him while he's knocked down, and that's also going to pair with our dangerous ambush that we're running with this setup. So you're going to get that extra 50% skill power, which is incredibly powerful. But the main things they're going to be focusing on is using all of our crit mods, basically. Now, if I could do this perfectly, essentially what I would have is everything that you see right here. I would change the spear and shield to health, and then slap emergency measures here in this empty slot. So we'd have all 4 of our crit mods, our damage and cooldown. It's really all we need. We don't need any sort of range with this bossing setup. And you're going to be dealing a ton of extra passive damage with hypothermia, and your blizzards are going to be chunking for millions on Pyro. When you get to like the double crits or anything like that with the bursts, it just feels so good. You're going to notice this health bar essentially disappear. That's basically the big limiting part of this build, is just if you crit or not. It's kind of like Lepic. So once again, that's why emergency measures on here would be really good. But I did need to actually throw front lines on instead, just so I could deal a little bit more damage and just focus on the RNG a little bit more. But I was consistently killing him in about a minute, as long as I was making sure not to enrage him and just focusing on damaging when he was down. But I do think the setup works pretty well considering our situation with Cold Snap. That's the area I want to focus on the most. But if you are interested in the bossing setup, put on hypothermia and then change this to a C and this to like the little A format, and you'll be good to go, and you can run this whole setup. Also, obviously, skill insight here, you can see this is wrong. Change that one to an A as well, and you can run the whole bossing setup. But you are going to be at a little bit of a disadvantage once it comes to the cold snap. The other changes that I make for the bossing setup are with our external components. The reactor, you want to be focusing into chill and singular. It's going to change your passive and your ult to singular from tech. So you want to make sure you have that combo. And I've currently been running the Blue Beetle just to make it a little bit more consistent. The other thing I really want to try would be with Nizestra's Devotion. This is something that I'm actually going to have maxed out tomorrow. So if you have a reactor with that on there, that could be a really good option, because you can lower his defense and do pretty decent damage to his weak points. But then for the actual passives on here, I'd be looking for skill critical hit rate and critical damage or extra damage to Colossus. But I think I'm going to be looking for the double crits personally. Now, for the actual components, you're going to be looking for the Slayer set. It's a ton of extra skill power. It is going to make your skills cost a little bit more, but it's not a big deal. You're not really going to run out of MP with just using your Blizzard and a couple extra passive skills. So it ends up working really well, and it helps you deal a lot more damage, and that's where you're going to be hitting really, really big numbers. The passives on here are the same as what I explained in the AoE. HP, you can do fire resistance if you're a little bit more squishy, because unfortunately with the setup, I can't fit health in, so we can't take quite many hits from the pyro. But max HP and then MP recovery while not in combat. On the sensor, you're going to be looking for the double MP, max MP, and the recovery. On the Slayer is the recovery modifier is the main one you're going to be looking for. And then on the processor is just the item acquisition distance. Same thing as the cold snap. Quickly, I did just want to explain how hypothermia is going to be working now instead of cold snap for the bossing setup. So essentially, hypothermia changes your skills to now inflict ice needle instead of ice shackle, which is a damage over time. So I hit him with my 1. I'm going to do my initial damage, and then it's going to be ticking. And then these damage over times can also crit. And when they do crit, you're going to be dealing big amounts of passive damage. Then a really easy way of doing so would be using your ice spheres and then also your second ability with the frost roads. So if you walk over them, you're going to be inflicting the ice needles and sending out the ice spheres on them. And it's going to be dealing a ton of passive damage for absolutely nothing, which is great. The 3, I don't really use a ton. It does decent damage, but it uses a good amount of mana for not as much of a reward. So I'd focus on using your second and first ability just for like getting some stacks. But your main damage dealer with the bossing setup is obviously going to be the Blizzard. So if we put this down and we get some crits, you can see exactly how much damage it's going to be doing. We initially put it down, it's going to tick for about 1.75 mil on some of the bursts right there. Every like 2 seconds you're going to see it go, and then when it explodes, it's going to be dealing a ton of damage. And we still have relatively really good cooldowns after just like 15 seconds or so. It's ready to go. It doesn't use all that much mana. There's like the double 1.75s So if you get really lucky on the crits, you can deal a ton, and then at the very end, it's going to deal quite a bit, over about 2.3 million damage here on this level 100 enemy. But overall, Ultimate Viessa has quickly become one of my favorite characters in the game. I think she actually would be my favorite. I think she's a ton of fun. She's one of the only characters I've played so far where every single ability is useful in some way. It's just ultimate ability spam, lockdown, AoE, also really good boss damage as well out of the Blizzard. I think it just has the whole package, and I'm a huge fan of this Ultimate Viessa. There's a ton of flexibility too. Like in the AoE setup, if you want to be running Slayer set, you can. Your skills are going to cost a little bit more, but you're also going to be doing quite a bit more damage. So if that's something that you care about, you can throw on Slayer for that one. Or you can run like more crit chance. You can run some defense with like the Tomb Vanguard set or whatever it's called, instead of the extra duration out of Annihilation. There's a bunch of things you can change around, but personally, what I have shown in this video has ended up being my favorite. If you want to just run the bossing setup, just make those couple changes to your polarizations that I mentioned. But hopefully one day we won't have to choose between the two. We can actually just use presets, how they're designed to be used, and just run both builds, which would be my ultimate dream. If you did enjoy this build video, make sure to leave a thumbs up on it to let me know. Also consider subscribing. We're gonna have a bunch more builds on the way. I'm gonna be swiping on Ultimate Valby come Wednesday, so if you guys are interested in an Ultimate Valby build, we're gonna have that very shortly here this week. I will have an Ultimate Bunny build, which I think I've been building a little bit different than other people, and I've personally been really enjoying it. It's also not squishy, so if you guys have been tired of bunnies dying in your games, this build is not going to be one of them. So if you guys are interested in that, make sure you are subscribed. Like I said, I will also hopefully see some of you over on Twitch. We've been having some awesome streams over there. I appreciate everybody stopping by. If you've been coming by from here on YouTube, it's been awesome talking to you a lot over there. But anyways, thank you all for watching this far in the video. I know it's been probably a long one at this point. There's a lot to talk about with this build, but seriously, once again, thank you, and I hope you all have a fantastic day, and I'll catch you all in the next video. See ya.